Proud to co-sponsor this series of talks. There will be a dozen of them this semester, as there are most, with the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs and with the Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee. Please join us every Wednesday at this hour. For those of you here in person, I have a print copy of the program, which you're welcome to take back to your offices and residences and hang on the wall so you remember what's coming up. And for those of you on Zoom, just navigate to the Office of Sustainability's homepage, scroll down to the bottom for news and upcoming events, and you can get a PDF copy of the full program for the semester. So without further ado, I am very pleased to introduce Professor John Pisciotta from Westchester University's Biology Department.
Thanks so much, Brad. Pleasure to be here with everyone today. It's very exciting to discuss the topic of sustainability and my interest in the field of beekeeping as well. Really a great way to combine sustainability and biology. Of course, I'm in biology department. And I really got into this a few years ago. After I had started at Westchester about 10 years ago, I would come in sometimes on the weekends in the spring semester, just have my experiments and things. And occasionally I would notice that the campus, the biology building, and sometimes even the student center was flooded with people on a weekend. It was so unusual. And I learned that it was the Eastern Apiculture Society's national meeting, or they're actually everything to the east of the Mississippi River, meaning beekeepers east of the Mississippi, and they would all flood in here. And so I was just here to streak a few plates, but I would stay, listen to the talks, got a bit interested in it. And then probably around 2015, got into the field of beekeeping myself. So I'll tell you a little about that, and maybe you're interested in beekeeping as well. What are the benefits? What are the cons, and so on. So a little bit of intro. We'll talk about bee products and services. The bees perform a lot of useful services. How you can start your own apiary and promote sustainability, the natural way, right? And how to hopefully sustain, not just sustain, but grow your operation over time. But in order to do that, you must understand certain bee diseases, organisms that will try to take advantage of that nutrient and resource-rich hive that you've created along with the bees, and will infiltrate. So it's up to you to keep a keen watch over your operations with tools like this. It's called the Varroa check. There's a parasite. Anyone ever heard of the Varroa mite? Varroa mite, they really are decimating the hives. But we as beekeepers can do our part to ensure the health, survival, and success of bees throughout the environment. And then I also have a few useful websites at the end. So humans have actually been interacting with bees since we evolved. That TMZ showed since the monkeys crawled out of the ocean, as they say. Well, we know that's not really how evolution works, but there's good evidence that humans have been collecting honey for anywhere from 10 to 20,000 years. How do we know that? There are actually cave paintings in areas like parts of Spain, as well as in regions of Africa, that depict humans collecting honey. We can see that quite well in this painting from Valencia, I believe, Spain. There's a cave, and they've dated it to around 7,500 BCE, which would probably be around 9,500 years before today, close to 10,000 years. And it's thought, and we still see this today, a bird, ever heard of a honey guide bird? It's a bird that actually leads humans to honey sources, hives. And they thought that was probably the gods speaking through birds and whatnot. What a great, sweet God this was. But we know that the bird now is actually deriving a benefit. Do you know what that benefit to the bird was, or is still?
Access to the hives, particularly the grubs.
Yes, the grubs, they're rich in protein. Of course, the bird needs that to grow, maintain its health, produce eggs and whatnot. It's also one of the few animals that can digest wax. So I would be interested in learning about the microbiome of the gut. We talked a little in 464 class about that sometimes. And what types of microbes are associated to allow growth on wax. We certainly can't break that down ourselves. The Egyptians in their hieroglyphics depict what they called the tears of Ra, which was their sun god, I believe. And they thought those were the bees coming down from the heavens to bring them sweet nectar, sweet honey, essentially. And the Romans used honey in many different ways. For instance, we know their army was quite adept, conquering much of Europe, the Middle East, parts of Africa, defeated Carthage in North Africa. You know who the leader of Carthage in, I believe, the Second Punic War was? Anyone? Hannibal, yeah. And sometimes they would get injured, those Romans, and they even used honey on their wounds. It has antibacterial properties. Today, beverages such as honey wine, also called, I don't think it's on the screen. Do you know what honey wine is formally called? Mead, right? Mead is making a huge comeback. And we know that the Vikings loved mead a lot, supposedly, as well as medieval kings. And it's one of the fastest growth industries. So I really also became interested in this because I teach a class called Industrial Microbiology. And we can see evidence of how microbes, yeast, can benefit us in our fermentation of honey to produce new products or rediscovered products in the case of mead. Today, fast forward a few thousand years, beekeeping is a huge industry. It contributes about 15 billion to the economic engine that is the United States agriculture, according to the USDA. Honeybees pollinate around 90 different crops and are responsible for about a third of the food that we eat. I mean, that's pretty rough, but many of the foods that we enjoy would not be possible without honeybees in particular. And of course, beekeepers, there's many professional beekeepers who depend on bees for their livelihood. I'm just more recreational, but it can also help to lower my bills a little bit. Honey's not that cheap in the store, and the honey you buy in a store might not even be honey. A lot of it's largely processed, like fructose corn syrup, those little plastic bears and things. It might not be entirely honey, or it's highly processed at least, and maybe pasteurized and things of that nature, which might be of concern to some. Why would we want to keep bees? Are there other products aside from honey? That even your backyard garden could benefit from the service of pollination that bees do provide. And of course, we know that bees can help to promote sustainability throughout the environment simply by pollinating plants. And when we have more plants, of course, there's more photosynthesis, more carbon dioxide being removed from the atmosphere and so on. But most people are interested in self-sufficiency as well as sustainability. If you have a sustainable household, most often you think of energy first. You might want to be net zero. Recently reached that myself. And do you have solar too, Brad? So it's a good thing to think about, reducing your energy and carbon footprint. But producing your own food can also be quite beneficial. Honey's a, jump forward, great food. But it might surprise you that the honey produced here in the United States, by and large, cannot be certified as organic for the most part. Why is that? Any plants within 1.8 miles radius from that hive cannot be treated with any chemicals, synthetic chemicals like fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. So you can just imagine how difficult that is to achieve in most regions. So be wary of that organic label that you see. In fact, I've seen that they've recalled some and pulled them off the shelf because of chemicals in honey that were recently found just, I think, the past couple of weeks. Most of the organic honey that you see is imported from regions in South America. I believe most of it comes from. That's not to say that the honey we can buy that is minimally treated or that you can produce. I don't know if my neighbors are using some fertilizers or something, but just because a bee landed on a plant that had been fertilized doesn't make it unhealthy simply because they took some nectar or what have you from it. here's a question for you, and you can win. Anyone here can win a free sampler bottle if you get this right. Is honey vegan? What do you think? What do you got?
Who said yes?
Oh, you can't win because you can win if there's another question for you. Yeah.
I was going to say it's kind of nuanced. It depends on fruit. I've talked to some vegan, and some of them don't eat honey just because it is produced by another living creature that is in a plant. But by and large, yes.
Could you summarize that so people
Summarize it?
Just
Yeah, the question is a very strict vegan in the strictest of terms, and I see vegan as oftentimes being about how strict of a definition can you endorse. The strictest of vegans would be the purist, I believe, and they would not use anything produced by any animal, no milk or anything. I mean, even a newborn couldn't be a true vegan because they're going to want milk, right? I believe, but it is produced by an animal, so in the strictest of terms, it wouldn't be considered vegan. But as a friend of mine once, what are we trying to do here? Things for the best, for sustainability, or just split hairs? If you're splitting hair to be the strongest vegan, then it's not. It is made with an animal. So you just won a tiny jar, and you still can't like one too. What other products might I have in my bag of tricks, or might not have? Well, we could produce candles, lip balms, tiny figures made out of wax, soaps. We can treat beeswax with lye, alkaline lye, or saponins to produce soaps. That's the traditional way that they used to make soaps, you might be aware. Pollen, some people actually eat bee pollen, and propolis, it's a sticky substance made by bees. Royal jelly, there's basically a market for this royal jelly. They feed the queen and produce queens. Has anyone ever heard of royal jelly? Bee bread, it's a mixture of the pollen and nectar made by bees. We can also ferment honey and make mead, as I mentioned. A huge market is emerging. Nutritional yeast, after you ferment your honey, I mean, you do typically dilute it a little bit more, add the yeast, it will ferment once you add your yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and you'll have a tremendous amount of yeast at the bottom. You could use them as a nutritional yeast. In fact, I have a whole book on it, Nutritional Yeast Cookbook. So if you're definitely would qualify as vegetarian, and then you got to ask if a yeast is using an animal-based product, and then you're eating that yeast, is it still vegan? I mean, you got to get so specific there. I don't know, but it is delicious. Yes.
Question about the royal jelly. Why the humans want to test it?
I don't really know. It seems like, in my opinion, a little bit of a new age gimmick. And once you build up big enough following, you can sell it at a high price. I don't know. Brad, any ideas?
I don't know.
Vinegar, apitherapy. Some people actually, through immunological tolerance, they can diminish their hypersensitivity reaction to low-level exposure to the bee venom. And even selling the bees themselves. A nuke is a nuclear colony. We'll get into that. You can make bread. Honey is a great alternative to table sugar. If anyone ever made their own bread, try that. You have to add sugar to the yeast. It begins to ferment. And I'll actually credit, I did send this to my mom. I don't know if she's like watching, but that's her bread that she made with my honey. And it's quite delicious, I can attest. The bubbles of carbon dioxide that are produced through fermentation via the yeast as they ferment the sugars give those little spaces. And do you know what the protein that helps to glue the bread together and allow that to be made on is called? What's that protein called? Do you know? Some people don't like it or can't tolerate it. Gluten. Yep, gluten. It almost glues it together. Okay. Hives can also perform, and bees very important services, pollination. Why are bees so well known as pollinators? Well, each bee, as it goes around, you might notice it only going to the same type of flower. That's somewhat unusual about honeybees. A butterfly might go from, who knows, a daffodil to an iris to chrysanthemum, or they probably are different seasons, so it might not work, but you get the idea. Of course, if you take the pollen from one species to another, it's not going to result in a new offspring. But honeybees, this is the pollen that is collected from a similar type flower of the same species, and it's going to transmit it to another of the same species. So that's why they are such great pollinators. And what crops are pollinated by bees? Many, and some of the ones that have nutritional and economic importance to humans are shown right here. Strawberries, well, the ones that are highly dependent would be things like onions, blueberries. I think blueberries are produced largely in New Jersey. And you can also grow blueberries. I grow myself, and you want an acidic soil for them. And they're nice because they're perennials. This, do you know what kind of nut that is that really depends so much on honeybees?
Almonds.
Yep, almonds. And actually, there's a tremendous industry where this is a 18-wheeler that is tipped over full of beehives. And just as the ancient Romans used to have ships off the coast of Italy with beehives on them, and they'd move with the seasons up and down the coast to help pollinate their crops, we, with our 18-wheelers, move hundreds and hundreds of hives on each truck to coincide with the seasons and enable or facilitate pollination. And some crops, you can see how dependent California, with its valley regions, when they're not having huge drought, is on agriculture. And there are some links, hopefully once this is posted, I don't know if it'll work, but you can try clicking on these links and or typing them in, and you can learn more about this. The almond industry, actually, more bees died, 7 times more bees died in those orchards than, I guess, 7 times the human population they had calculated. I don't know who the mathematician was to figure that out, but basically you're sending the bees in to a hostile environment. It's a little unusual, as you can imagine. And who's going to clean all this up? You know, there is a show all about truckers who have to go out and right trucks. Anyone ever seen that one? Pretty neat. You saw that? Yeah. Imagine if they had to come upon a truck full of honeybees. That would be challenging. So what can we do about this? Are we always going to be dependent on shipping in our food, large farms? You can start your own little mini farm. And what better way to do it than with your own tiny apiary to produce honey that you can make to bake bread, produce mead, eat it in, have it in your tea, eat it on your bread. It's delicious. Well, to do that, you're going to need an adequate site. It should face south, preferably southeast, to catch the morning sun. Those bees love to sit on their little landing board out front. It's like a little front porch, warm up a bit, and buzz on and off towards the sun. Find the first one to find some nice flowers will return, do a little, how do they communicate to the other bees? Do you know? Yes? Yeah, they do a little dance. Yeah, they do. Actually, I believe it was found out in Germany after World War II. They observed some bees and saw exactly how they were taking the other bees and communicating through their dance locations of honey, or I should say nectar producing crops useful for honey production. Give it some overhead shade, maybe underneath a tree, because once that high summer sun is beating down, you don't want your hive to overheat. They also need to be somewhat near a water source, maybe a creek or stream, pond, hopefully not your neighbor's swimming pool, because that neighbors sometimes complain about bees. You would like some wind production from the north and the west, especially in the winter time, a windbreak. So as to protect them. And think about your soil that you're going to set it on. Sometimes some soils can promote various pests, and I'll get into that later, like the small hive beetle. In fact, an impermeable substrate is often best. Or if I were to do it again, I would have put like some of that landscaping fabric that things can't get through, because part of the life cycle of the small hive beetle goes into the soil. You can organically combat the larval stage with small nematodes, microscopic worms, basically. And I did buy them to try it organically without using any pesticides or what have you, but it's not 100%. Physical barrier would be better. What's the cost to start your own apiary? It's going to range on the really cheap end to $100. Maybe you could get it less, or 1,000 or more. This is called a flow hive. It's a new design. It produces the honey for you. Ever heard of a flow hive? The honeycomb has little notches in the bottom of each cell. So as soon as the bees put the honey in, it drains out to the bottom and collects. It's pretty neat, and they did patent it. An Australian father and son team, I believe. And this cost about 1,000 just for the hive itself. That guy made out of a giant plastic bottle. I don't know where they sell that industrial size of a soda. Definitely not healthy. And we're against plastic, I guess, our group generally, but it's a very cheap, inexpensive way of making a beehive. So it's really up to your own creativity. Here's my own site, kind of out of focus, but the southeast is, I guess, to your left. The sun's popping up, and I'm establishing the raised pedestals. Why might you want them raised off the ground a little? Any ideas? Yep. Yeah, they can actually fly, but some things like mice would love to get up in there. I believe we've even had some. Ever heard about bears in our area or New Jersey? Have you heard about that? It's true, right? Like Petals. Did you hear about Petals the bear? He was the bear who walked on his hind legs. No one heard about that? Yeah, he was in New Jersey, and sad fate for Petals, I must say, fortunately. But I wanted to combine two things. Maybe one day I'll tell you about mushroom cultivation. Of course, I have a lot of twigs and tree branches that are constantly falling. So I figured if I could break those down using mushrooms, mushroom mycelia fungi, I could cultivate the mushrooms. The bees, there's been some scientific reports that bees can use mushroom products, just like we use, what's an antibiotic derived from fungi that we can use to cure infections, you know, an antibiotic. I promise my micro students who might be watching that I touch on micro. Yep, penicillin. And certain, gonna say
I wasn't sure.
it's all right, go with your gut. And any students, like if you ever have a multiple choice question, go with your gut and don't erase it, because it's gonna probably be wrong if you change it. All right. So there have been some studies that show that mushrooms, they are fungi, certain types produce antiviral and even antibacterial compounds that can kill pathogens, organisms that can harm our bees. So I set up the mushroom patch. This is just wood chips. And later, I did see the bees flocking over there. And later, I was growing, this is a small plate, but that's called the garden giant, Stropharia. And I was successful in growing some different types of mushrooms. Now, if you get into mushroom farming adjacent to your beehive, I recommend growing mushrooms outside. Some people try it inside, but when those spores get on your wood and things, it's not as fun in the house. What types of beehives might you want to put up in your apiary? Well, you have a range. You got the step hive, kind of like LL Cool J's hat. That's one of the older traditional type. A top bar hive where you can pull out entire honeycombs. Actually, they do sell honeycombs, sometimes at a very high price, like $20 for a small little bit of a honeycomb at some farms I've seen. Or LLL, cool, very cool. The Langstroth hive. So Langstroth, you might not know it, But Philadelphia in Pennsylvania we can think of it as the birthplace of modern beekeeping. For Langstroth was a clergyman in Philadelphia who loved beekeeping. And he devised this hive called the Langstroth hive that we still use today. It's made of a series of boxes within which we have, they're called frames. I was thinking of bringing in some frames, but didn't want to get too carried away. Sometimes dealing with it can become a sticky situation, as you can imagine. All right, we got a top cover protecting from the elements and the inner cover. This really helps to prevent condensation. They say bees can tolerate cold, but cold and dampness together will wreck your hive. And this basically helps to prevent condensation raining down. There's a tiny hole in the inner cover. We put our honey supers. These are top smaller boxes that are easier to lift. There's 10 frames in each one, and they become filled up with honey by the bees over the course of this late spring and summer. Below that, we'll put a queen excluder. It's a mesh that only worker bees can pass through because it's a small enough size. However, we also have the brood box, and that's where you find the queen. The queen is necessary to ensure the success of the colony and that those workers that die off are replaced. There's usually only one queen per hive. That's our brood box. And you can also add a second brood box for a really large beehive as they grow. So a beauty of the Langstroth hive, it's expandable. You can pull out frames and inspect them. You can pull out a box, take it inside and extract all the honey, or into a honey house or hopefully away from the bees. And then we have our bottom board, and it should be on a type of a stand. There's also, kind of hard to see, this thing is goes on the front, and it's called an entrance reducer. You could, in the high summer, take it away totally, and tons of bees could go in and out. And then as the fall arrives, you can turn it that way, and a few bees can come in and out. And then when it's now the winter, they still need oxygen, but you don't want to cut them off totally, but you don't want a lot of heat to escape. So we put it this way, and then just one or two can enter and leave, and an entrance reducer in its proper use will help to preserve your hive. Ah, yeah, there's his quote. When it came to him, Langstroth, in a moment, the suspended movable frames kept at a suitable distance came into his mind, and he could scarcely refrain from shouting out "Eureka" in Otis Street, Philadelphia. So another important factor to note: these are evenly spaced, the frames, and as long as we have what's called a bee space, about the size of your index finger, the bee won't fill it in with propolis and wax. If it's any closer than the width of a bee, they will fill it in. So Langstroth, by keeping them this proper distance, ensured a spacing and that we could remove frames. Older types like that LL Cool J hat, they had to smash them up. Like the medieval kings, their hives had to be completely smashed, and their mead was full of bee parts also. So it wasn't as delicious. What types of bees do we find? Certainly, we have usually just one queen going around laying eggs. Some people put a mark on her back to find her. There could be up to 50,000 workers in a hive. All of the workers are females. We also have males, and usually there's, I bet there's probably more than 50, or probably more than 500 at times, but they're only there to reproduce with the new queen. Eventually, we're going to have to form new queens to expand our hives. Go into that in a minute. But the new virgin queen has to mate, and she'll fly out, mate with a swarm of drones. The first one that catches her will mate, and then quickly he'll die. And the mated queen will return, hopefully, and establish the new hive. She'll go throughout these different frames, laying her egg, and over time of about 3 weeks, that egg will hatch into different stages of larva. Won't go through them all, but eventually the bee, tended to by so-called nurse bees, those are early stage workers, before they learned to fly and gone out to forage, they work as nurses, helping to raise the other bees. And you'll see them eating their way out of the sealed, capped cells. And it's kind of neat to see them pop right out, ready to go. Sometimes the bees are very industrious. And if one of these guys dies out front, you'll see that they take him out and drop him off so that, of course, there's no decomposition in the hive. How can they direct the type of bees that are formed? Well, most of the workers just get worker jelly and nutrient. The nurse gives them this worker jelly nutrient. Occasionally, I don't understand all of the chemical signaling and whatnot, but they need to form a new queen and they'll feed her the royal jelly. And that will take any old egg, provided it's not a drone. The males only have one set of chromosomes, whereas the females, of course, queen's female and the workers they're diploid or have two sets of chromosomes. Well, the diploid egg will hatch into a larvae, and if it starts being fed the royal jelly at an early stage, will develop into a queen. And the queens are quite a bit longer and much more long-lived. They can live 2 years or more, whereas the workers they usually live maybe one month up to about 2 months. And the queen also slows down in the winter. As the days grow shorter, she stops laying as many eggs, and there's a broodless period. It's too cold to develop those larvae, but of course, their new year starts probably at around the 22nd of December or 23rd, when the days start getting longer. And so right about now, she's picking things up, preparing for the spring a little bit. We can look when we take out a frame and identify what's going on by inspecting our frames. And just by looking at it, a well-trained beekeeper will see something like a peanut. That's a new queen cell. If you see these in the spring, be advised you're going to have trouble soon, because if you watch the show like Game of Thrones or some TV programs, if there's too many queens, like in England around maybe the 1600s or something, in Scotland and England, Elizabeth and Mary, was it? Yeah, Mary's Queen of Scots. They were at each other. Oh yeah. And the similar thing will happen inside of a beehive. If two hatch immediately, they'll go to war and one will have to die. In fact, you can see the queen bees fighting right there inside of the hive. We also have, through an inspection, eggs, good to see eggs. We can see flat sealed cells. Those are workers that are developing. You can also see raised cells bumped up a bit, and those are the drones. The drones are a little bit larger, and just by looking at this, we can see exactly the types of bees that are going to be emerging. And we want the proper balance. If there's too many drones, the drones don't do any work. They don't collect any pollen or nectar. Pollen is used for protein and raising new bees. And what do you think the nectar is used to make? Honey. And of course, why do they produce honey? For their food, and it's an energy source to get them through the winter. All right, so this is what we might look at, but how do we originally start our hive? We might have made the site, built the box. Well, you have a couple of options. Most people, like myself when I first started, I drove all the way up to Wilkes-Barre. I don't know, is that how you pronounce it? Wilkes-Barre? Wilkes-Barre to the north in PA. And I bought in the early spring, probably 2015 or maybe 16, bees. But they were like, it's too cold for you to put them in your trunk. You're going to have to bring them in your car, main cabin car. And they started to escape as I was driving. But the good news is they only wanted to follow the sun, and that was like out my side window. So I just remained calm. Another option, aside from buying them, is you could catch your own swarm. So here I am last year, and I happened upon the swarm. And this swarm was a little challenging because it's a bit high up near some wires and things. But I had this little, any beekeeper should always have an empty cardboard box. Number one thing, because you might have to catch a swarm. And what I tried to do is use this sustainability. Who knows what this thing is?
Laundry drying rack.
Yes. Do you use that? Yes. You will save so much energy if you stop using your dryer. That uses a tremendous amount of power. And just put them on a laundry rack. You'll also help to humidify the winter air in your home, which can irritate, mucus lungs, things like that. Anyway, it also can use in a pinch to lift up the box. And then I trimmed that branch, and I wish I had it on video because it worked perfect. They fell right in there, and I sealed it really quickly, and I transferred them into a brand new beehive. But of course, if you don't want to try that, you could also buy your own bees. They are a bit costly, I must say, and like everything else, the price always seems to be going up. But that's a common way to start an operation, is to buy. What's the difference? A nuke is really an overwintered mini beehive. Everything you need, everything they need, the queen, the different casts. Whereas a package is just a random queen and 3 pounds of bees made from a central production facility somewhere. And these usually don't do quite as well, but it's a cheap, easy way to get started. Sometimes your queen will die, and you can buy a single queen in a little queen cell that they will send you for about $25. All right, so once you establish, I would say you always want to start with 2 hives at a minimum, because if something goes wrong in one, you can rescue it possibly with the other. There's so many mistakes. Like I only started with 1 hive at first, and eventually it collapsed, and I couldn't rescue it in time. But here's the operation. You can see fungi, mushrooms growing in the back. We got the sun coming in, and it scaled up from 2, and I was splitting it and eventually made 6. There's different ways you can catch a swarm, because in the spring, they'll make a new queen cell, and usually the old queen will leave with half the hive, and that's part of the swarm. They're getting too overcrowded, so the old queen leaves and leaves it to the new. And so if we catch that swarm, we could install it in a small box to begin with, and as they grow, raise it up. You could also, swarm sounds super exciting, and it is. Like the first time you get a swarm, you're like, oh my gosh, I got class in, half an hour, but what am I going to do? Catch that swarm, right? If it's in your neighbor's yard, it's even more exciting when that happens. Neighbors don't like it too much. So an easier thing to do would be to make a split. You would get a jump on the bees and find the queen cell. You're proactive. It might be mid-March, start looking, and you can actually dissect that off, remove it very carefully, and put it in a brand new hive. And then you're going to take some of the workers from the established hive, maybe 3 or 4 frames with honey, with pollen. Some developing larvae are needed too. And you make basically your own little nuke, and you slow down that larger colony. So you're slowing them down and splitting them at the same time. So you don't have to go running around catching swarms, which, while sort of fun and exciting, it kind of does lose its luster or excitement after time. Especially if they're too high up, like that guy on the ropes in the ancient cave painting. I can see like they'll lead you further and further. You never want to lose like $200 flying away like that. Hopefully we have a nice, calm apiary. When they are battling, if you don't make these splits and things, the queens will go to war. And when that's happening, the hive follows the behavior of the queen, the dominant queen, and they will become very aggressive. Just leaving your door when they're battling like that, they might see you, and there's usually that like 1 bee that just has it, run to the car. It only happens a little time, a bit of the year, but and you can block it with making splits, but you got to stay on top of things. Nice docile hives, you'll observe foraging. They're too busy to cause trouble, right? I mean, who wants to complain and cause trouble when, operations are good? We've just got to focus on getting the honey, or humans would say getting the money, right? The bees They're out doing their thing. They're getting pollen, nectar, and water. They got to stay cool in the summer. If they've had a nice successful day, you might see them bearding on the front at night in the summer. This indicates they're starting to get a bit crowded and they don't want to get overheated on a hot summer day, but it's perfectly normal. They might even be hanging off like that. Sometimes, however, your bees can take a turn for the worse and they'll start to rob other hives. Here they're running in, running out, ripping up things, stealing honey from the other hive. Usually the stronger takes from the weak. But you as a beekeeper, if you see that, can slow it down with your entrance reducer. It might be too warm, but you can put this small opening on and the robbers won't be able to rush things, rush the show, as they would say. And the defenders, just a couple defenders, are guarding that entrance. When it's open like this, there's not enough defenders for all of the infiltrators. And the things you do also can, like if you put sugar water out, it stimulates that robbing instinct. Some people feed their hives different ways. What would you need after a successful summer going into the fall to get your honey? Well, a smoker stimulates a forest fire, distracts the bees. They're like, let's eat some of our honey to prepare to vacate. That buys you enough time to get in there to use your hive tools, little pry bar-like device, to pull out frames. You probably want a bee suit and gloves so you don't get stung. A box and a bucket are good box to carry things like frames to maybe an indoor extraction site where you'll take the honey out, and buckets for honey. As you look at the frames, you might see a lot of honey at the top, some pollen around here, and then capped or uncapped brood developing bees. But above this, you're going to have that queen excluder, and the smaller boxes are pure honey. You don't want to have a lot of bee parts in your extracted honey, and that's why that little queen excluder. So I wouldn't take this for honey, but I would use the supers. They're also much lighter. A full brood box could be 60+ pounds, and it's awkward too, especially with thousands of stinging insects after you. Along the way, you can spot, are things moving nicely, single eggs, larvae developing, or are we seeing lots of eggs? That would indicate you lost your queen. The female workers are following their instinct, but they lay lots of eggs and these only turn into drones. It's a major problem. So looking carefully can find problems soon, and you could use your queen right useful colony and take early stage single eggs, transfer them in, and they're going to develop into a new queen. So you could save a colony that's going down the wrong way. And when I say colony, I basically mean a hive. Here's some tools. This is a big centrifuge. I used to wait for the hottest day and crank it at a high speed. And then I felt like heat stroke coming on. And now I go into a cool air conditioned place with a drill, save some energy on my part, solar powered. Filter our honey so we don't have a lot of wax in it. And you can see what that looks like. Here's the operation indoors. This was in the middle of the winter, so I had a heater inside. The drill, the centrifuge, spins it. I cut the wax off the top of the caps, and then you filter it to get rid of any residual wax, and then you can bottle it right up. It's quite healthy. Honey, you can follow these links later. According to dentists and research that's been done, although it is rich in certain sugars, it's antibacterial and can actually combat dental cavities and gingivitis. Might surprise you, but as Hippocrates said, let your food be your medicine and your medicine be your food. And honey is a great case in point with that. Actually, there's some interesting mechanisms. We won't go into them here, but I'll probably talk about that in some bio classes. Actually, it's broken down through glucose oxidase to form hydrogen peroxide, which kills the bacteria that can cause gingivitis and things like that. It's also a great way, once you've got all your honey, to reuse old jars. This was from Aldi, really inexpensive store. It actually had sauerkraut in it, but I cleaned it out really well beforehand. And I like how it looks, you know. So they make good gifts and things. And they say it's better to reuse than to recycle. Ever heard that? Most of our recycling actually never gets recycled, especially for plastic. I've learned about 90% in one study I read isn't recycled for plastics. Now I'll wrap up with this, but there are plenty of parasites that can ruin your nice operation. There are certain mites. Mites can affect many agricultural fields, and certainly the varroa mite is our greatest concern. Imagine something the size of a pancake that you're carrying around that's a parasite feeding on your blood. That's about the scale of the parasite these bees have to deal with. You can see it right there. They're arachnids. And they can also spread viruses, like the deformed wing viruses. Not only are mites, there are other parasites, beetles, and even a death's head moth. It gets into the hive and emits a sound that resembles the queen's call for the workers to relax. So this death's head moth fools the workers, and then it feeds on the honey. We also have other types of moths like wax moth around here. Not surprising, some of these, we don't have this right now. We do have these guys came from Africa, and the mite came from Asia, varroa, and they carry certain viruses like the deformed wing virus. And as these have arrived, starting mostly in the mid-80s, the number of colonies or hives has really diminished, unfortunately, but we're starting to pick things up. It was around 87 that the varroa mite arrived first. And basically the mite gets into the cell, the mother, she'll lay her eggs and sum it up fast, produce more mites. And the key thing to keep in mind is if you have more of those drones, the males that are produced by the laying female in abundance, that is going to produce 3 mites for every drone because they take longer to develop and are larger. Whereas the female worker, she only gives you 1 mite. So if you have a colony that went wrong, it's no longer queen right, laying workers, all males, and you don't take care of your varroa mites, it can soon become a bomb of varroa mites. And they might get so uncomfortable they'll leave and go to somebody else's, and that's how the mites have spread. Beekeepers who aren't paying attention, doing mite checks, quantifying them, looking at the frames, this is full, you can see of males, drones, and probably full of varroa mites. And this is a little thing, you put the bees in, treat them with alcohol, and you can count the mites. If you find a lot of mites, organically, you can treat with certain organic acids, like formic acid in the high summer. It can penetrate through the wax and kill the mites. It's certified organic. Or formic acid in the winter, when the rootless period. And this is a heater, basically put it on a 12-volt car battery. And we could use oxalic acid right in there. And it's going to heat up, fumigate the hive, and it will bind to those mites and kill them. There's been some interesting study. It doesn't harm your bees. And I hit them 3 times in the winter and I'm still seeing the bees. They don't hibernate, they do cluster inside. And so far they're surviving. But we've got to be careful and make sure to tend well to our bees and keep these parasites to a low level using organic tools like I just showed you. Now, if you're interested, I have local links. I'd recommend you to start with an apprentice program or a mentoring program. And there are certain associations. You can look me up also, and I can definitely send you advice if you're interested. But all of these are great organizations. And I also have other links you can go to once this is posted. Hive placement, setting up your hive, the beekeeper's calendar, things to do every month. So that pretty much wraps it up. Thanks so much for your attention.
We certainly do, if you do. We're at 5-1. So for those of you who do need to log off or to go to another class, please feel free to get up and do that. But Professor Pisciotta has a few moments. So why don't we start with a question from the live audience, and then we can take a few from the Zoom audience.
In the back there, yeah.
I just have one more question.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't know. Is that Hamlet?
You need to repeat that for
To be or not to be?
No, but I do have a question. Which is, well, first of all, thank you.
Sure.
And I was just curious, you work in Chester County or live in Chester County. Is this something that is popular in this particular county compared to other counties?
I think it's somewhat popular, and it's gaining in popularity. During the pandemic, people were somewhat trapped in their homes and looking for new things that they could do on site. And there's been an uptick in beekeeping, and it's somewhat sustained since then. Just like with the baking you might have heard of, beekeeping also, and they all go hand in hand. These groups, like certainly the Chesco Bees, the Philadelphia Beekeeper Guild, they're local organizations, and they're very fascinating talks. Usually it's the second Thursday of each month. They have different guests, like a surgeon from the Navy who's a beekeeper and really advocates and go into all the medical benefits of honey and just different organic strategies. A lot of beekeepers are turning towards like Apivar. It's not organic. And I started with that originally, but it's the pesticide trap. The more pesticide they use, the more the pests, in this case, the varroa mites, become resistant to it. So you have to buy more, and eventually it loses its efficacy. So people are turning more towards the organics. But yeah, it's a growing field, and people are getting into it. You can definitely make money at it too if you want. I just usually use this every single day. Oatmeal, you can make granola, you put it on toast, put it in tea or coffee. It's great with like a smoothie if you've been exercising and need some protein and sweeten it up. Pretty much everything, but organizations and small businesses like Swarm Busters is where I bought my bees originally. Ever heard of them? Swarm Busters? He's this guy, Bert. I think it's Bert, but he started with just a couple hives, and he started splitting like I showed you, and he made this huge operation of hundreds and hundreds of hives. And now it's like a family multi-generational thing, and they do pretty well with it. They have these huge beards. I always think of Bugs Bunny, like when they arrive on campus. Yep.
When you collect honey, how many large size hives?
And what I wait till the fall. Honey is graded, like the lighter the honey, like there's wine connoisseurs and honey connoisseurs even. And the lighter it is, the more pure they would say. But actually, the darker it is, the more antioxidants and polyphenols and other beneficial compounds there are that can produce inflammation. And we know inflammation can lead to certain maladies, often cancer due to free radical damage in the DNA and things. And so I wait for the fall, and you're going to get more. They're working longer and harder. And I can get about 70 pounds from my hives. I could probably make more. Like people also do funny things that bridge that organic, like they're going to buy table sugar now if their hives are getting hungry and pour table sugar in the top, or protein patties. I don't want to go to extremes like that. I don't actually, sometimes my hives die and crash, and it's just part of nature. As long as you have one, you can split it and build back up, because I don't want to actually have hundreds of hives. I just wouldn't have time for it.
Let's see if there's a question from the Zoom audience. If there is, oh, I see Ezra Zitomirsky. Do you want to unmute yourself and pose your question?
Oh yeah. Well, the main question I had is sort of adjacent to honeybees and hive bees, but what have you also like been involved in providing habitat for ground bees and native bees, not necessarily for honey, but just for like fighting lawns and rewilding lawns and helping those out.
Yeah.
For folks here.
Yes, he was asking if I'm interested in providing habitat. Actually, the honeybee isn't technically an original species to the US, as I understand it. There are different strains, like some from Russia, parts of Europe. The Carolingian bee, I believe, is one of the top ones. There's Italians. Each has its benefits, pros and cons. There's Africanized honeybees from Africa that are somewhat aggressive, and they're supposedly moving into PA now. You might have heard. But they're aggressive but produce a lot of honey. And there are also native bees that certainly are beneficial as well. And really, to get to your question, I don't do anything like herbicides to my lawn. I just leave it in a natural state. Dandelions, I won't pull them up. I'll eat them. I'll put them in soup. And you know that dandelions, just like the honeybees, were actually brought over originally as a crop. Now they've become pretty much established, and Langstrop would tell you clover is one of the favorite foods of the honeybee. So I let the clovers run wild, and they just love that. But yeah, I don't use herbicides or pesticides on the lawns.
Well, it's after 1 o'clock, so I would like to thank you once again, Professor John Pisciotta, and thanks to all of you who joined us today for this first session of our research and practice seminar. Please join us again next week at this time.
Thanks so much. See ya. Have some time.